Hi, welcome to Hogs Media, the Inappropriate Harry Potter podcast. My name's Christina.
And I'm Natalie, and today we're looking at chapter 4 of the book Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. I wasn't as smooth as I was in the last episode, so got a bit nervous.
Have you been drinking again, or?
I've got myself a drinking problem, just like Hagrid.
Nice. So, sorry, I was just about to say this chapter's called Back to the Burrow.
You need to back off because that's my job. I've got two jobs in this episode: the title and the etymology of random words, and I haven't done either today.
Snooze, you lose. That's your fault, isn't it?
Yeah.
Fair dues.
Can you tell? Can the listeners out there tell which one of us is the most dominant sister? Even though she's younger than me, walked all over me.
Weird, isn't it? That's
Even
true.
as an
You're the
adult.
older one, so technically you should be in charge, but that's not how it plays
pushover.
out. Oh, no. In that case, would you like to start?
No, I'm scared.
Okay, so the start of this episode, Harry is packing up all his stuff because he's been invited to the Burrow. And what's funny, you know how I said before that no matter what situation Harry gets in, he could be attacked by a basilisk, he could be dying, he could be fighting for his life. And he always stays kind of chill, like he doesn't really worry, he doesn't get anxious. This whole chapter, or the beginning of this chapter, is just Harry sitting around Privet Drive, shitting his pants. He's really anxious, he's stressing out, he's really worrying. So he's worrying about what the Weasleys are going to wear and whether they're going to wear proper Muggle clothes and how Uncle Vernon's going to react. And I started to make me feel a bit nervous.
Yeah, I started to get nervous too. It's like he's fine when he's in control, so he can, fly towards a dragon to try and get his egg. But when he's depending on other people to not fudge up, he can't handle it, which makes a lot of sense given his background.
Yeah, and he's worrying about this clash of the magical world and the Muggle world, I suppose. And he knows Uncle Vernon has an anger problem, and he knows that Mr Weasley's maybe like a little bit simple when it comes to understanding Muggle ways, even though it's his job, which we discussed in the last episode.
Yeah, let's back up a little bit because I think Mr. Dursley is perfectly legitimate that he's got anger issues, because every single time, and you mentioned this.
Yeah, I agree.
Every single time they have contact with the magical world, they get embarrassed or shamed, or they get a pig's tail erupting out of their son's ass.
Do you know what? You're right. And at the end of this episode, I'm actually pissed off. I am pissed off with Mr. Weasley. Because why on earth would you bring Fred and George with you to pick up Harry? Those two cannot be trusted. They're really naughty. They leave. He really wrecks the Dursleys' house. We'll get to that later. But yeah, I'm not happy with Mr. Weasley at the end of this chapter.
This chapter should be Weasley's disrespect home.
Yeah, or 10 ways Mr. Weasley fucks up.
Yeah, exactly.
Or how the Muggle War began. Like, he does everything to kind of to mess up Muggle relations. It's crazy.
It's ironic because his actual job in previous books, he's like, oh, I've got to go because some wizard is, I don't know. So he says something like some flying elephants have just gone over Northumberland. And I was like, hang on, you're the flying elephant flying over Northumberland right now. You literally could not have made more of a mess. Someone needs to come in and sort out the mess you just made.
Yeah. That's a good point. And what's really bad is what you just mentioned. Poor Dudley is walking around really nervous. He keeps clutching his buttocks. I think he has PTSD. He keeps getting flashbacks of when they gave him a tail. And I thought, actually, at the end of this chapter, they've been torturing Dursley.
I think we lost you there a little bit, Chris. What were you saying?
Where did I get to?
I don't know. I sort of just dozed off, to be honest.
I was hoping you were going to fill in as I was sorting out the technical issue, but you were just staring blankly into the screen and I started panicking.
That's hilarious. I literally can't remember what you were saying. Saying something about PTSD, clutching his tail.
Yeah, and basically, this isn't. He keeps getting tortured by these awful wizards, and I'm like, at this point, I'm on the Dursley's side.
Yeah, and now I'm thinking, did Dudley ever? Well, we know the answer to this. He clearly never had therapy. Is he eating his emotions? Like, is he comfort eating ever since that happened? Which puts a whole different spin on his weight issue and makes J.K. Rowling's observations of him seem kind of cruel.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's really messed up. So there's lots of nerves and tension, and this sense of waiting. And it reminded me of like when I was a kid, and you'd have to wait for people, like for guests to arrive, and everyone was on edge, and you were just staring at the clock, and the minutes would drag, and it was just that horrible
Mm.
suspense.
And you remind me of Mr. Dursley. He makes a
Thanks.
comment. Yeah, you do. The
You remind me
moustache,
of
the moustache mostly.
the little fat kid, Dursley. So that's funny that you said that. Yeah, that's a coincidence, isn't it?
No, it's not just the moustache that reminds you of Mr. Dursley. The other reason is because he gets really miffed off because he's like, oh, they're late because I think they're supposed to arrive at 5 and it gets to
Hmm.
5:15, doesn't it? And I was like, oh, that's Chrissy's response. You
Yeah,
don't like arriving late.
I was nodding and I was like, yeah, too right. That is rude, Mr. Dursley. You're right. I agree.
Yeah, I'd love to know why he was late because I don't think Flue powder takes very long.
This is another strike for me against Mr. Weasley's like kind of end of year review for his job. So
Mm.
he needs to understand in the Muggle world, fireplaces aren't as important as in the Wizarding world. In the Wizarding world, they use fireplaces to travel. Every home has a fireplace. In the
Mm.
Muggle world, in the 1990s, that's not the case, Mr. Weasley. You should know that. People do have blocked up chimneys. People do have electric things. So again, that bothers me. He made that
Mm.
assumption. He broke the rules and wink, wink, nudge, nudge, got a mate at the Ministry of Magic to connect the Dursley's chimney up into the the traveling system, which is completely against the rules to do that with the Muggle chimney. So he broke the rule there. He could have got someone fired, and
But
um,
also,
and then
but
ultimately it
also,
doesn't work.
Chris, yeah, and that's the thing. Like those rules are there. They're not to protect them, but they're probably there to protect the Muggles more than they're there
Mm,
to protect the Wizards. And it just feels weird that Mr. Weasley he undermines his own job
yeah,
by going against the very rules set up to protect the
and you're
Muggles. It
right.
feels a bit odd.
Yeah, and it's proved right. It's proved that that was supposed to protect the Muggles. Was what happens? They get trapped. He has to blow up their wall. He ruins their house. Pisses
Mm.
them off in the process. It's very disrespectful of their home. He doesn't say, "Oh, I'm awfully sorry, Mr. Darcy. We're stuck in your chimney. Is it okay if I blast through the wall? Please stand back. Please move anything that you
Mm.
don't want that you don't want to get broken." Doesn't do anything like
Please.
that. Just blasts through.
I mean, as well, there could be asbestos in that fireplace.
Oh
There's
my
no
God.
protective gear for the muggles. There's no mask or eye gear, protective eyewear. Do you think this is J.K. Rowling sort of just taking the piss out of, political people when they say one thing and do another? Do you think this is she's sort of
Maybe.
ridiculing government
Yeah,
people?
possibly. Like, they always
Because
say
he is a
things.
hypocrite.
Hmm.
He's a hypocrite. You're not allowed to magic up cards, and he does that. It's like he doesn't respect the very rules and the very
Exactly.
things he's supposed to uphold.
I just can't believe he trashed their house. Absolutely trashes it.
Well, do you think he has less respect for belongings because in using magic you can blow something up and put it back together again with a bit of
Yeah,
reparo?
do
Do
you
you
know
think
what? Yeah, you're probably right because he can just undo it all. But they don't know that, do they, the Dursleys? All they
no?
can see is their home. That's their sanctuary. They're very, very proud of their home. All they can see is it being destroyed.
Well, I've just realised where Ron gets his lack of empathy from Mr. Weasley.
Hmm.
Because
Having said that, though, there's something Mr. Weasley does which I thought was really sweet. Is he tries to engage Dudley, in conversation, doesn't he? He's like, "How's your summer, Dudley?" And he can see that he's nervous, and he empathizes with him.
he does try and engage in conversation with Mr. Dursley, but he doesn't seem to kind of understand how they might be feeling having these intruders come into their home. So in one hand, he's not very understanding, but on the other, do you think he's trying to make conversation because he feels uncomfortable rather than because
Yeah.
he's trying to make that other guy feel at ease?
It does say that Dudley. Why can't I hate the
It's
fact he's
Mr.
called Dudley
Dursley.
Dursley? Sorry.
Oh, but what's the
Sorry,
boy
I'm just
called?
about to Dudley, isn't it? Dudley Dursley.
I just call him
Yeah,
Vernon. Isn't it
Dudders.
Vern?
Vernon is Uncle Vernon, Mr. Dursley.
Oh,
I'm just gonna
okay.
call him Dudders, okay? So Dudders is literally clutching his backside, and Mr. Weasley's looking at him like, "What is wrong with you?" But instead of being judgmental, he's actually quite empathetic, and that's why he's like, "All right, Dudley, how's your summer?" Like he feels sorry for him because he doesn't get why he's
Yeah.
clutching his ass like a weirdo.
Oh, you know what? I think he should feel really bad for the fact that Muggles have such a negative view. He should sit down and be like, look, what's going on here? But it's just awkward, isn't it?
Yeah.
Another eye roll moment was when they were all trapped in the chimney and he was like, oh, they must have, blocked it up.
Mm.
And Harry's like, oh, it's an electric fire. He's like, oh, eclectic. And I was like, oh my God, you
Yeah,
don't even know
again.
how you don't even know the word electric. Please tell me.
He needs to know what electricity is, right? Because if someone has put a charm on a toaster and he needs to, stop that from happening, which is his one job, he needs to understand that that's an electrical object and this is how it works. It blows my mind how little
Yeah,
he
how
knows.
can you fix things that are broken or magically fiddled with if you don't know what they should look like and how they should
Exactly.
work?
It's really
So
strange.
ironic. Very ironic.
Just
It's
before we move on, what
ironic
what what really pees me off? Where's Molly? Does she
at
ever
home where
leave?
she belongs,
Yeah,
in
that
the kitchen
woman.
where she belongs.
Yeah, she is tied to the kitchen sink. It pisses me off. They all go on an adventure to pick up Harry Potter. Again, she doesn't come to Quidditch either, the Quidditch World Cup. And I'm like, Molly's at home, yeah, in the kitchen, being little Miss Housewife. It really bothers me. She never goes anywhere. I'm like, get some hobbies.
Yeah, she probably, comfort eats and flicks through the local magazine trying to find news of Professor Lockhart.
Yeah, listening to Celestina Warbeck on the
And
radio.
it's true. Why aren't? Oh, hang on. Does Ron come to the house?
Yeah, so it's Ron, Fred, George, and Mrs. Weasley. And why you would bring Fred and George, I don't know.
It would have made more sense to bring Ron and Hermione, who are friends of Harry, and Hermione, being a
Yeah.
Muggle, could have probably navigated things a little bit better.
Yeah. There is a funny bit, right, where they come out of the fireplace and it says the book says there's a nasty silence, and then Mr. Weasley goes, "Nice place," and it's funny because it's a shithole. He's just wrecked it. There's stone and plaster everywhere. Everything's screwed. And I just think that's quite funny. Um,
He's so polite, but he probably means it because he doesn't know what it looked like before he messed it
true,
up. So he
true.
probably thinks it's actually kind of cool. And like, he doesn't know he knows nothing. Let's just get that out there. He
Mr.
knows
Weasley knows
nothing.
nothing. And he also tells Uncle Vernon, "Oh, I collect plugs and batteries. My wife thinks I'm mad." Um, Yeah, weird. And then he starts looking like eyeing up the plugs, like, oh yeah, you got a nice plug over there. That's a nice little plug on the wall.
I
And I'm
like
like,
the pins on
again,
that plug.
yeah. He was just itching to get his hands on the TV, and I'm like, I don't believe that you can't get a TV. Like, just
Yeah.
go Accio TV outside someone's house. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's a bit of a joke, really. I almost wonder if they just sort of humoured him giving him that job, and actually there's lots of other people working around him, and their job is just to keep an eye on Arthur Weasley.
And undo all the shit that he does.
Yeah,
Yeah. And he
makes
only
you
got it
wonder.
because he's like a pureblood, isn't he?
Yeah.
Um,
So
oh,
does he tidy up the fireplace afterwards
he
then?
does. So the first time I listened to this, I wrote down, "Oh my God, it's really rude that Mr. Weasley didn't even explain that he was actually going to firstly smash up the room and wreck all their stuff, but that he was okay because he was going to fix it." But when I listened to it the second time, he does say, "Oh, don't worry, I can fix it all." But again, they don't understand that he can just flick a wand and undo it. He should
Hmm.
have made that more clear, I think.
Yeah.
And what I find even funnier is when they're like ready to go and they're like, okay, well, we're going to leave now. And Darcy's like, yeah, whatever, Harry, bye. Mr. Weasley goes, excuse me? That's not how you say goodbye. You're not going to see him for the whole summer. And I've put, that's a bit of a cheek, him calling them out
Yeah,
for rude manners when he's just wrecked their house.
I agree. He can't be given lectures on how you say goodbye when his hello and welcome was
Hmm.
so awful. And it's just awkward. It's so awkward. I kind of like it on one hand because I'm like, yeah, you know what? Someone's standing up for Harry. But on the other hand, I'm like, oh, read the room.
It's tricky, isn't it? Because would it be boring if Mr. Weasley turned up, got on really well with Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia, they were fine with the meeting, and everyone was happy and parted ways? I guess there has to be conflict between Harry's Muggle life and the magical world, and there has to be that clash of cultures because that's what makes it interesting.
I think more as well, from my perspective, I felt like that would have felt like a betrayal for Harry had the Weasleys actually got
Mm,
along really well and laughed and got along really well because he sees them as the enemy. They've made his life hell. So J.K. Rowling wants everyone that meets the Dursleys to see them as horrible and
mm.
mean and nasty because he needs validation. Harry Potter needs validation that they are horrible.
But then why wouldn't they have made this scene slightly different so that Mr. Weasley was doing everything perfectly and fine and maybe was doing some nice magic, like, oh, I can fix
Mm.
that damp spot on your ceiling or whatever. And then
Mm.
the Dursleys were doing awful things. It's just strange, isn't it, that actually Mr.
Mm.
Weasley's in the wrong. He's behaved very badly, ending with poor Dudders getting, you know, abused by Fred and George. It's a bit weird, isn't it? Because I'm reading this thinking, you know what? I'm on the side of the Dursleys. I think the Weasleys are being assholes.
Reading it back now as an adult, I definitely saw it the way that you saw it. But I remember being a child loving it because I felt like they were getting treated as badly as they had treated Harry. It felt like the only time
Mm.
the Dursleys really get their comeuppance is when the wizards get involved. And I remember feeling really glad when they get like treated this way.
Yeah. But isn't that teaching us as children that actually to be revengeful? Like, you treat me this way. I'm almost like I'm going to bully you back. Shouldn't we be teaching it so that actually be the bigger person? I guess the world's not a
Doesn't
perfect place, is it? That's a bit twee.
like being a better person just does not feel as good as getting revenge.
Mm, yeah, but then that's why we have Lord Voldemort. Lord Voldemort wouldn't exist if that mindset didn't exist. His whole career has been about trying to revenge his shit childhood and the fact that the relationship between his mother and his father and all of that background, isn't it?
That's interesting. I don't see it as revenge. I see it as, I don't know, he just wanted to be powerful.
But he went to the Riddle house and murdered his family and he murdered his father, all for this sense of revenge, right?
I thought that was because he just wanted to be the last remaining Riddle. He didn't want to have to fight for power or hereditary. What's it called? Not hereditary. What's it called? Inheritance. I think it was more because of a lack of emotion, and he just didn't want them like embarrassing him. He didn't want any ties. He didn't want to be like. That's interesting. Why do you, as listeners, why do you feel that he killed his family? I never saw it as revenge, but you did, Chris.
Yeah, because if you think about it, his poor mother um, was really kind of destroyed because she fell in love with a muggle. He left her when she was pregnant. He had no interest in his son. He hated her for what she was. He hated her for being magical. Even though she was magical, um, she died in horrible circumstances, in rags, in poverty, in a children's home. She gave birth to a boy that grew up in an orphanage, and that's I think made him angry and made him want to vow revenge on his muggle father, and that's why he hated being called Riddle, and sorry, he hated being called Tom, didn't he? When Dumbledore goes to see him, he's like, don't call me Tom, that was the name of my father, I've never liked that name, blah 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 blah.
I never got a sense of him that he loved his mother. I always got a sense that he was ashamed of her for being, in his eyes, so weak
Yeah.
that she couldn't even live to be with. I never got the sense that he felt sadness or felt the need to revenge her death.
No,
I always felt
no, I
like,
think you're right. I think because he said to Dumbledore, well, my mother can't have been magical because she died. And if she was
mm,
magical, she wouldn't have kind of let that happen. I think you're right. I think he's probably frustrated that she allowed that to happen and she died of a broken heart and she let a muggle do that to her. But I still think he resented his father. What his father did was quite bad, wasn't it? Like he had no interest in his son. He abandoned his wife and son, even though she. It's difficult, isn't it? Because she put a love spell on him and everything. But
but Voldemort from a really young age, just I don't know, he never wanted to be ordinary, and I thought he didn't like the name Tom because it was a Muggle ordinary name. He seemed to
yeah,
have that intrinsic hatred towards being ordinary or Muggle, and as soon as he found out he was indeed special, he latched onto that. I guess because he felt largely invisible his whole life.
he had a really tough life. It's awful. And that's why I said, is Aunt Marge worse than Voldemort? Because Voldemort is a product of his origin story. He has an origin story which is dark, and he grew up in an orphanage and his mother died, and all of these things made him into this, I think, vengeful person. Whereas Aunt Marge is evil for like I can't see a fathomable reason.
We talked about this before, and I'm pretty sure I came up with a couple of reasons why she might be the way she is. Because, why doesn't she, she could have a backstory. There's no reason why she also doesn't have a reason for being the way she is.
I suppose,
What?
I guess in my mind, it's going to be like a silly muggle reason, like, I don't
Oh,
know.
that's so Voldemort of you. That's so
I
Salazar
know. Oh my
Slytherin.
God.
Yeah,
It just came
see,
out.
it does though, doesn't it? It's in your subconscious, just slips out.
I think you
Very
must have been
telling.
actually.
Very telling.
Mm.
Um, but
So
it's true. Even as we're reading the books, we think wizards are better than muggles. That is very Slytherin of us.
hmm.
This isn't even a real world and we're taking Slytherin's side. Can you imagine if this was a real world? I'm going to be honest. I'm just going to put it out there. If I was a wizard, I can definitely see
Don't
myself
say it.
thinking that I was.
Don't
I
say it.
can't help it. If I could do all this stuff with the wand and have all these magical powers, how could I not feel like I was more special than a muggle?
Are you saying it would go to your head and that you might be a Death Eater?
Yeah. I can definitely see it going to my head. And if I fell into the wrong crowd, being very easily swayed as I am,
Hmm.
I can see myself going to quite a dark place. I ask anyone right now who's listening, if you were a wizard, just be honest with yourselves, okay? Would it go to your head? Think of all the cool shit you can
Hmm.
do. This is a safe space. I just want to know I'm not alone. Just even if you just go onto our Facebook and just do uh an X. It means I'm not on my own. Are you saying it wouldn't go to your head, Chris?
I guess I honestly think if I had an origin story like Voldemort, I am the kind of person that I think would be quite vengeful. And I'm not very good at forgiving. And once
Mm,
someone crosses me, I'm kind of done. So I'm
mm.
wondering whether if I had that kind of backstory, maybe I would. I'm going to use magic and I'm going to get revenge. I can see you making. You can make two choices, right? You can forgive somebody even if they've done something awful to you, and you can let it go and you can go on with your life and try and get over it, or you can do a Voldemort and just think, you know what? I'm getting revenge and I'm gonna like I don't know, just lose it, just lose control. No.
But he learnt from a really young age, people let you down. He didn't learn that he was lovable. So he had to learn to look after himself, didn't he? So, I can really identify with a lot of what Voldemort goes through in terms of I could totally see why he'd be like, I don't know.
Do you know what I've just realized as
She,
well? Because like from what
yeah.
you're saying, like he went for a tough time and he he was in a Muggle orphanage. Why on
Mm.
earth is there not a orphanage for magical kids? Why on earth did magical kid end up in a bloody Muggle orphanage?
Well, maybe there is, but he just got really unlucky, and for whatever reason, she went to a Muggle orphanage. There are lots of institutions that we're not we're not sure about whether or not they exist because Harry missed out on all of that. Like, we were talking about whether or not a wizarding nursery existed or a wizarding primary school. Do you
Interesting.
remember we did that episode about that? Or if
Yeah.
airplanes exist in Wizarding Land because everyone can fly on broomsticks and apparate.
Yeah. And maybe actually, if he grew up in he needed to grow up again, I still think he's a vengeful character. And that's why he had to grow up in a muggle orphanage, because he had to feel like the odd one out, the outcast. He didn't fit in. And he also had to learn that he was different and he was maybe better. There was something about him he didn't understand, but he knew he was different from other children. If he grew up in a magical orphanage, he wouldn't have had that kind of origin story. So
No, because he wouldn't. Yeah, you're right, because he would have been just like all the others.
mm.
And they also would have had really sad stories, and
Because
he
he
might have connected with them.
Yeah, because when Dumbledore meets the young Tom Riddle, he does have an inferiority complex, and he's very confident. You know, he challenges Dumbledore. He's like, "Okay, if you can do magic, show me." Like like Dumbledore almost kind of thinks, "Wow, like I could refuse," but he doesn't.
Which, by the way, is very different from Harry Potter, and they both have the same origin story. So they're both born to
Yeah.
parents that have died. They both are
Yes.
pretty much orphans. They both are odd ones out. But what's
Yes.
interesting is Harry is how you would imagine someone to be, very unconfident, very unsure of himself.
Yes.
Isn't
And
that
Dumbledore and
interesting?
Harry do talk about that. They're like, basically, Dumbledore says, you know, you and Voldemort, you could have taken the same path as Voldemort, and you
Mm.
didn't. You chose to love and to forgive. Voldemort turned to revenge and hate. It's they're two sides of the same coin. They're like,
I don't know. I mean, part of me feels like Dumbledore kind of skims over the fact that Voldemort was very clever and intelligent and masterful. And maybe Harry ain't all that in the old magic department. I don't know. Does he
yeah. To
have
be
the
fair,
skills? Does he
he
have the skills to
struggled
be a
with
lord?
he struggled with Wingardium Leviosa, didn't he? And Accio. So
He's just scraping through potions, love. He ain't gonna
even
be.
Mad Eye
I
Moody was like, "Oh my beep God, I tried so hard, Harry, to help you and to hint, and you just were not getting the hints." And even Mad Eye Moody's like, "Are you
yeah.
dumb or what?"
Yeah, yeah. That was hilarious. And I feel like Harry's mum was had great eyes, but also was really good at what was it? Spells, chemistry,
I guess
charms.
Harry's like a jock. He's great at sport. He's great on the Quidditch field, but when it comes to actual academic stuff, he's like, nah. And there's nothing wrong
Tapping
with that.
out.
Nothing wrong with that.
No,
We all have
that's
different
great.
skills.
That's great. And maybe it's good that he's not good at everything, but I do wonder if he I guess friendship was really important to him. He was lonely and he wanted friends, didn't he? And I guess for him, he'd been bullied, and so he was really kind because he knew what it was like to be bullied, whereas Voldemort was the bully, and that was his way of
Mm,
controlling people. Really interesting.
yeah. It's really interesting comparing Voldemort and Harry, and I know Dumbledore used to keep saying the reason you're stronger than him and the reason you'll win is because you're capable of love. And Harry used to get really annoyed, didn't he, at Dumbledore? He'd be like, yeah, okay, I get it. I can love, big deal. But
Yeah, I
actually,
don't get
on a
it.
fundamental level, that's the difference between those two. Tom Riddle is incapable of love. He was incapable of understanding love, and that's why he messed up big time by killing Harry's mum and creating that unbreakable spell where she protects Harry, and he has that protection until he's 18. He underestimated that because he didn't understand that a mother would not give up her baby. He didn't get that, and he went for his whole life not understanding that. Whereas Harry was the opposite, wasn't he? Harry
I
has loved and he's made
still,
friends and he's got loyalty and
I suppose what Dumbledore's saying is that, I don't know, I just feel like, oh yeah, you can love, that's really fluffy. Give me a wand and a decent spell book, and I'm pretty sure that will help me more than being able to love.
just teach him some decent magic.
Just
Like,
teach
bearing
him
in mind,
something.
his dad helped make the Marauders map, which is one of the most amazing pieces, like magical objects that have really advanced
Yeah,
magic. And Harry
and
is like, Wingardium Leviosa.
saying it wrong. And he did animagus as well, his dad. And his mum was like one of the best chemical potion masters of her time. No,
Mm,
what did she do? Charms. Um, I don't know.
yeah. So anyway, getting to the end of this chapter, we end with basically, Dudley starts gagging, and it turns out that Fred and George have purposely dropped some of those tongue tie toffees, whatever they're called. Um,
Engorgement charms.
yeah, so his tongue gets massive, um, and it just really annoys me because I just think you've done so much damage here because you've proved the Dursleys right. You've just proved that they're wrong to fear the magical world. You are a threat.
Mm.
You are like it just really bothered me.
They're in their home. They haven't respected any part of the Muggles' life. They haven't even come through the front door. Um, it's really sad.
Yeah,
But at the time when I was a kid, loved it.
yeah,
Thought
you're
it was
right.
hilarious. I felt
Mm,
like, yeah, you're getting your revenge now. Because I feel like Harry couldn't get away with that because it would jeopardize his honor, and his character. But for Fred and George to do it, it's kind of funny. But as an adult, I'm like, this is awful. Poor Dudley,
mm.
Dursley, whatever he's called, Dudders.
Yeah, and they're trying to push away Mr. Weasley and they won't let him help. They're so panicked. They don't appreciate the fact that actually we need to let him help our son and undo it. So,
But what's awful, if you think about all the things that have happened to Dudders every time they are involved in magic, the first time they got those magical letters, they ended up stranded on a little hut in the rocks. Do you remember the first
mm,
book? And then Dudders gets his tail, and then Aunt Marge gets blown up into a big balloon. Um, I just think
you're
it's
right.
awful. I
They
mean,
you
for
understand why
them
they
to
fearful.
even for them to even allow the Weasleys into their house, they must have been really scared.
Mm, yeah, I get it. It makes sense. So,
Not good, not good.
yeah, it really isn't. Great. So that was quite a good scene. I did quite enjoy that. I thought it was funny when the Weasleys were all stuck in the chimney and Ron says, "What's happened? What's going wrong?" And then like Fred and George is like, "Oh no, this is exactly where we're supposed to be, Ron. We're supposed to be all stuck together inside a
I
chimney.
love
Don't
it.
worry about it." And I was like, "It is quite funny, isn't it?"
I would hate that. I would hate that feeling of being trapped with like Ron on top of me and Fred underneath me.
Oh, would you? Because that sounds kind of all right, if you ask me. But again,
You have a
book
thing
six,
for
not book
Ron.
five. I honestly, I can't remember what film it was. And I was like, oh, hello, Ron. A little bit of a gun show going on. I'd
It
like to
can't be
emphasize
book four.
again, it's book 6 or 7. It's definitely not book 1 to 4 because that's inappropriate. They were just want to emphasize that.
Aren't they 11 though? They're 11 in book one, 12 in book two, 13 in book three, 14 in book four. So you're saying from books five and he's 15.
I'm going to say book 6 and 7.
I
That's
think that's
perfectly
safest.
legal, yeah.
Yeah, I guess. I wonder if you know how in America you got to be 21 to drink, but
hmm
in England you can be 18. Is it like in Muggle land? No, in Harry Potter land, what is the age at which you are considered an adult? I
Oh,
feel like we
hang
should
on.
know
We do know
this.
this because they talk about how they take the trace off when you reach, is it 17? And they see that as legally an
What
adult.
trace? What
It's
trace?
just called the trace, where every underage wizard has a trace on them, which means they can know where you are and know if you're doing illegal magic. And it's like book 6 or 7 where they say you don't have the trace on you anymore because they're trying to figure out how the Death Eaters know where they are.
Oh, and is that why they come and pick Harry Potter out of his home when he's about to turn 17 because the
Yeah.
mum's protection goes?
Yeah, so I've got a feeling the trace is removed from that. I want to say 17. I'm not sure.
You're gonna go on your phone and check it out.
I might do after this, yeah.
Good, because I am not filling in the gaps whilst you Google that.
Cool. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I just want to get to the Burrow. I like it in the Burrow. But that reminds me, you tagged me in a post where they have one of those those clocks that say
Oh,
in
yeah,
the
I love
Burrow.
those.
But when I clicked on it, it didn't say where each number was. It didn't say like Mr. Weasley's in bed and
it didn't have the characters, but it just had the like home, Quidditch, jail. It had all those.
Oh, okay, I didn't
If
see
anyone
that.
that's
I'll have a look
listening,
again.
basically they sell the Weasley clock on this website, and that's what we're talking about, and they're really cool. Oh, but it didn't have the name on the spoons, you mean? But they had a space where you can put your photo. How cool is
Okay,
that?
we're not advertising. We're just gone off on a random chat. I was thinking out loud, guys. Sorry.
No worries. Um,
Might
great.
edit that out.
Okay. That's it from us then, isn't it?
Yeah, and then our next one will be chapter 5.
Great. Thanks for listening.
Say it.
You say it, it's your turn.
Mischief managed.